you have organizations that understand how healthcare works, how defense works, and they're organizations who know how to bring revolutionary innovation. There are very few organizations that have both in the same place. And the idea of creating this one place that has the world's best operators and the world's best revolutionary innovators and a culture where they can talk to each other just seemed like if we could do that, you could create magic. And that's exactly what happened.
Hi, I'm Paige Kuderka, partner at Daversa Partners and leader in our firm's national security practice. And here with me today is Yisroel Brumer, also known as YB, founder and CEO of DEFCON AI. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Humor me with the story again about how you go from quantum physicist to DoD for 15 years to Red Cell Partners.
Yeah. So I started in academia. I was a quantum mechanic at Harvard, which was great, and I was really happy and planning on doing a 30-year academic career. September 11th happened, and I got very motivated to help and started to feel like a lot of the academic work I was doing was disconnected from the real world. So I joined the government, started at the Department of Homeland Security when they were standing up, and then very quickly switched over to the Pentagon. I did 15 years there, kind of worked my way up from entry-level analyst to eventually reporting directly to the Secretary of Defense. Did a bunch of stuff along the way, and then left government about 4 or 5 years ago to join Grant Verstandig, who you introduced me to, and thank you.
Of course.
To be a founding partner and president at Red Cell, and then started Zephyr AI, where I was the CEO, co-founded with Grant and Jeff Sherman, and then DEFCON, co-founded again with Grant and General Paul Selva, who was vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and then turns out that being the CEO of a startup that's taken off like a rocket and being president of Red Cell is too much work. So the first time that happened, I stepped down from being Zephyr CEO to focus full-time on Red Cell. This time, just really excited about DEFCON, and Red Cell has already launched and become this incredible thing. So I'm focusing on that primarily now.
Awesome. I always felt like you were primarily suited for Red Cell and potentially startups in defense tech because you did these, impossible problems or worked on impossible problems inside of the government as part of CAPE. And so I remember hearing you talking about the, interesting ecosystem in physics combined with the challenges that exist inside of the DoD with CAPE. And then you brought that over to Red Cell, which I think was so important. Can you talk a little bit about what Red Cell is in general, and then also who is Grant Verstandig would be helpful?
Yeah, so I'll start with the end. So Grant he's like straight out of the movies. He's one of these tech visionaries, an absolute genius, an incredibly good friend also, who is able to see the world vastly better than it is and can connect where you are today to where he wants to drive the world to in a set of real steps that you can actually take. And he's the best I've ever seen at doing this. And so, you connected me to him, and we had a series of great conversations, and he was starting Red Cell. He's the founder, CEO, chairman, and he was describing to me this vision of an organization that brings together real deep operational expertise in healthcare and defense, and we've since expanded to cyber as well as in revolutionary innovation. And I got really excited because I'm a big believer that there is a revolutionary innovation crisis in both those fields now, where you have organizations that understand how healthcare works, how defense works, and they're organizations who know how to bring revolutionary innovation. There are very few organizations that have both in the same place. And the idea of creating this one place that has the world's best operators and the world's best revolutionary innovators and a culture where they can talk to each other just seemed like if we could do that, you could create magic. And that's exactly what happened. Red Cell brought in just the best of the best across the board, and magic happened. And since Red Cell has become Part venture capital firm making investments, part venture studio building companies, has built about a dozen revolutionary tech companies ranging from next generation cybersecurity to AI for precision medicine to disrupting elder care. It's been absolutely incredible.
I think what's also amazing is that not only the people that are around the table now, looking back 4 years later, but like what you've been able to build in a very short period of time is almost unheard of inside of national security startups. So we should talk about like why startups too for you. I always felt like you were well suited to join them, but why don't you talk a little bit about why that was interesting to you?
Yeah. So the thread through my career, I get a lot of questions about, how on earth did I do my career planning? And the answer is I didn't, by the way. Every job I've ever had, I thought this is the job I'm going to do forever. And I loved every job I've ever had. The thread though has been, I get really attracted to incredibly hard problems where you can actually make a strategic difference. So I get really excited at, in the Pentagon I worked on, how do you revamp consequence management after Katrina so Katrina never happens again? How do you we had serious cultural challenges and architectural challenges in the nuclear enterprise, and how do you create a really stable triad that maintains nuclear deterrence out in the future? How do you prevent PTSD? All of these questions were incredibly important. And then it became clear to me that there's a revolutionary innovation crisis happening in national security. And the same is true in healthcare, where we are at significant risk of losing our global military advantage if we can't bring revolutionary innovation in at a pace sufficient to outpace our adversaries. And study after study shows you that the startup world is the way to do it. And DoD really struggles to bring in startups not because, the Department of Defense is an organization filled with incredible people who are well-meaning, mission-driven, working hard, but there are cultural barriers, there are legal barriers, there are acquisition rules that make it very hard. And that creates a moment of exceptional crisis. And so, when I left the Pentagon, people said to me, hey, why are you leaving the Pentagon? I said, I'm leaving the Pentagon for the same reason I came in. It's because I want to be in the place where I can have the most impact. And right now, that's startups. DoD, the healthcare industry, they need revolutionary startups providing operationally impactful technology that real world operators can use. And there's a dearth of it. And that's the gap we're trying to fill.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think I really realized the challenges that existed before I raised my hand to say, hey, I'll go out and build the national security practice inside of Daversa. But for the same reasons, I was uniquely frustrated by seeing what was happening in my husband's world inside of the Army on deployments, and then also what was happening in the tech world, the commercial side, which was gangbusters with innovation, building autonomous vehicles and systems that were for consumer use, when in reality, my husband and his troops needed that abroad. So I think frustration has brought a lot of us here, which has been inherently a good thing,
Yeah.
I think, at the end of the day. And I think you have to be a little bit mad to do something big. So I think that's a helpful part of the story. I also want to talk a little bit about why you chose DEFCON as the unique problem that you wanted to put your stamp on.
Yeah, so DEFCON's start was very unique. I had just stepped down from running Zephyr, but we got a challenge from the Department of Defense that effectively asked the question of, hey, Zephyr had come along and done revolutionary work in artificial intelligence for precision medicine and drug discovery. And we're a group of defense guys. And the Defense Department struggles enormously to deploy operational artificial intelligence at scale. And it's creating real risk. And can we kind of do the same thing for the Defense Department that we did for healthcare? And that got me really excited. And then when we started to see a path to actually making a difference and closing this enormous strategic gap, which is the difference between winning and losing wars 10 years from now, coupled with the fact that we ran the table on building the dream team. I mean, I've never seen an organization put together a group of just world-class superstar after superstar. That just got me really excited. I was like, hey, here is a moment where the opportunity exists to do something enormously important. The people are in place to actually get it done. How can you pass that up?
Let's talk more about you saw line of sight to making this successful with the DoD. When did you notice that? How did you see that?
So it really started with a call from the department to us, asking sort of this big picture question of bringing operational AI at scale, and specifically came with the contested logistics problem. Contested logistics, for those who aren't familiar, it's the question of how do you move these enormous armies, Air Force across the world when your adversary is trying to stop you. You know, since World War II, America's been able to build up the Iron Mountain overseas relatively freely, and once we do that, we kind of turn an away game into a home game, and the military's been able to do unbelievable things. In an era of global reach and cyber strikes and so on, the expectation is we're going to revert to the World War II and before era, where people try to stop us from doing that. And that creates real risk. And and the question was, can you mitigate or eliminate that risk with artificial intelligence? And that was an incredible moment for me, because I've been thinking for a long time about the problem of bringing AI to defense and why it's so hard and what the struggles are. And contested logistics closed a bunch of stuff for me. And I think like a physicist, I can't help myself. But contested logistics can be mapped onto nodes and networks and graph theory in a way that reduces a lot of the mathematics and opens you up to a bunch of techniques that are otherwise very hard to implement. And once you have, and this is where I get really excited, because we've deployed those tools and they're unbelievable. I mean, they are. I'm gonna be honest and say when we started, I wasn't sure we could do it, but we did it, and the tools are absolutely unbelievable. But once you kind of create that beachhead and produce real world operational tools, your ability to scale off that's enormous. So the opportunity to revolutionize missions across the Department of Defense is real. And it was probably, a couple hours after that phone call, I called Grant, and he and I had one of our, and by the end of it, we just had this sense that the path was there, and we could clear the lane, and we could get it done, and we just never looked back. I don't think there was a single moment of doubt after that this was something we were going to do.
That's awesome. And when you thought about assembling a team, what was the first thought in your mind?
General Paul Selva. Cannot do this without Paul Selva. He was the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He ran the entire U.S. military. He was the commander of Transcom. He has had every job in the contested logistics world that we're trying to disrupt. He is also simultaneously one of the most incredible leaders I've ever met, and the deepest thinker on the intersection of military and technology that I've ever met. And we knew we weren't going to do this without him. He was already a Red Cell advisor. He was a Zephyr advisor. I bring him in whenever I have really complicated leadership challenges and I just don't know what to do. So he was absolutely the next conversation. I wish I'd kept this. It sounds so apocryphal, but it's real. I actually took a piece of paper and I wrote Dream Team at the top, and I listed all the people I wanted in the company, and it was ludicrous. I mean, Admiral Bill Lesher, who was running the Navy at the time, I mean, he was not available. He's running the Navy, and I was like, yeah, but he is the perfect guy to be our Navy advisor. Mark Esper, Christine Fox, who's absolutely amazing, and ran the Department of Defense. And Gus Perna, who is the COO of Operation Warp Speed. He made the COVID vaccine, unbelievable mission-driven leader. I just wrote this unconstrained dream team list, and every single name on that list is in the company now.
That's awesome.
Scott Stapp, who is the CTO of Northrop Grumman.
Amazing.
And don't ask me how that happened. I mean, I hit Bill Lesher up at his retirement party, literally, and. But I think it is this. Honestly, I mean, this is a group not just of incredible people. They're all deeply mission driven, and I think they all just saw the opportunity to really visit enormous change on the world and to mitigate risk at a strategic level that doesn't come along. You know, I tell my kids this all the time. I say they tell you that, you know, you can change the world, right? It's a lie. The world resists change. There's actually a really interesting physics theory about this called perturbation theory. But the world resists change. Complex systems resist change. They revert to the status quo. And if you try to change the world, generally the end result is you find yourself beaten and bloodied and the world remains comprehensively unchanged. Every once in a while, there's a moment where you can shift the path of the entire world. And Red Cell exploited one of those moments. Zephyr exploited one of those moments. There's a number of other Red Cell companies that are doing the same thing. Savoy Life for elder care and Andesite for cyber threat hunting and so on. And I really believe that DEFCON was the right thing at the right time to shift the trajectory of national security. And so the same thing that drove me to do it, drove this whole group of incredible people who have 1,000 other things to do and a massive demand signal on them. But I think, you know, we would call them up and we'd say, look, this is the moment and this is the trajectory the world is on and this is the trajectory we're going to put it on. And they just got really excited and joined. So
that's awesome. You know, it's very challenging, I will say, getting something adopted by the DoD that is a new technology, that is built from scratch, that has not been around for 100 years, is really challenging in general. And I had to learn the hurdles and regulations as part of building this practice to recognize how hard it really is. But all the things that have worked in the commercial world for creating game-changing, life-changing, and altering companies are very similar. You need somebody just crazy enough at the helm to be able to push beyond some of those barriers. So I think you're the perfect level of crazy for this. I also think, you know, the advice that we need to give to other companies trying to build in this space is critically important in addition. And I think Red Cell has a unique perspective because you've been able to build multiple companies that have been successful inside of defense tech, which is unheard of, actually. So what advice would you give to startups, or founders, I should say, that are thinking about building something because they're so compelled by the mission in their first couple of years?
Yeah, so I guess I would give three different pieces of advice. The first is to recognize that the Department of Defense is comprised of mission-driven, serious, high-quality individuals. And there is a parody out there that bureaucrats like to bureaucracy and their impediments to success. It's not true. There are mixes and levels, and some people are better than others and so on, but across the board, the department is full of serious, well-meaning people who are trying to move the ball down the field on incredibly important problems. And they have their own set of restrictions and requirements and processes that they have to navigate, which the average startup founder won't understand at all. And from the outside, it will be very frustrating and very hard to understand. So my first piece of advice is accept that you're dealing with just world-class mission-driven individuals who are speaking a totally different language, and you need a translator of some sort. And that's one of the things Red Cell has done really well. Is we'll connect, you know, startup founders who are incredible visionaries with retired 4-stars who speak the language, and create a culture where the two can talk to each other, which, by the way, is painful, and it allows them to navigate the system more effectively. The second piece of advice I would give them is to recognize that things move slowly in the Department of Defense. So, for example, and I remind people of this periodically, the budget that is on the Hill now for FY25 for the Department of Defense was completed before DEFCON existed, right? And DEFCON has closed tens of millions of dollars of contracts. We have built and delivered real-world operational tools. We've stood up this company from scratch to 50 or 60 people, built this world-class team. And the budget that was completed before we were even an idea hasn't actually been approved yet for execution, let alone executed, right? So on those timelines, you create this enormous mismatch between the speed at which the average startup works and the speed at which the Department of Defense works. The speed from decision to action for the Department of Defense, from this literal, I'm going to fund this thing, to actually putting money in the bank, generally exceeds the runway for the average startup. You have to know that. And you have to know how to navigate it, because there are ways around it and there are ways to move faster, but you also have to plan for it. And one of the biggest pitfalls I see is startup founders will say, I got a contract right around the corner. And my response is, well, you do have a contract coming, but it's not right around the corner. And you need to plan for it. And I've seen a lot of organizations that put themselves in enormous financial risk because they believe the signals they're hearing. They're hearing the signals correctly. But the best analogy I can come up with is when your kids kind of come up to you and say, give me a cookie. And you say, I will give you a cookie. And you're saying it in all seriousness. But your kid is sitting there going, where's my cookie? Where's my cookie? Where's my cookie? Right? Because there's just a mismatch in timelines and sense of time.
Right.
The last piece of advice I would give is to accept the pain. Okay? It's hard. It's really hard. And it's hard on all fronts, by the way. I've been in the Pentagon. It's hard. I've been on the startup side. It's hard. I've been in, working in large organizations, small organizations, in academia. Everybody's doing hard work, but being a startup founder in the defense world is uniquely hard. There aren't very many people who have run and founded startups outside defense and inside defense, and I can directly compare both. They're both really hard. They're both really fun, but there is this unique additional level of pain dealing with this massive bureaucracy that struggles to bring in non-traditional providers, revolutionary innovation providers. And my advice is to accept it and expect it, accept it, and then just push through it, because it's important, because the fate of the Western world and our global military advantage depends on it. And if too many founders run away because it's too painful, then we will lose our global military advantage. And so my primary piece of advice is, it is going to be painful. Let's go.
Yeah. And I don't think it's totally indifferent from the commercial landscape founder mentality that is required to make game-changing companies either. But I think there is an extra level of difficulty that you have to jump through. When you think about fundraising in this space, because you mentioned one of the biggest challenges is timeline. That means runway. When you think about investments, have you seen a change from Red Cell's perspective, or even outside of Red Cell's perspective, around venture getting excited about the national security space?
Yeah, I mean, everyone is aware of the trend towards venture investment in the national security space. I really support that. I think it's a very good trend both for national security and for venture. I think it will pay off. And I think the counter to the pain and the delays is that there is no other customer like the Department of Defense. Very sticky, enormous sums, massive opportunities that make this really worthwhile. I also think that DoD is behind in disruption, and there is space for an enormous number of Netflix replaces Blockbuster type steps forward. And I believe there is going to be, I believe, by the way, the current primes, I believe they will continue to exist. I believe they will continue to be enormously powerful and revenue generating organizations because they do certain things that they're amazing at, and there's no need or reason for startups to disrupt. But there's also this enormous space for next generation. Quantum space, the array AI. And so I believe 10 years from now, you're going to see a entirely new landscape of defense industrial base powerhouses that are going to be venture backed, and there will be enormous returns. The Department of Defense understands that and is encouraging it. That's a great deal. It's a win-win for everybody, right? Because it gives them an extra layer of diligence where a venture capital arm will come in and and sort through a variety of startup founders and figure out this group is more likely to produce, this group is more revolutionary, this group has their, a little bit too much head in the clouds, a little bit too much feet on the ground. So I think it's a win-win partnership, and I'm really excited about it. It does require patience on the part of the venture investor.
Right.
And Red Cell is very lucky in that we have a number of very patient investors who understand the business and are very sophisticated. And it requires urgency on the part of the Department of Defense. And that's how you kind of close that give me a cookie gap.
How do you balance that, though? There's this level, national security tech requires a certain level of balance between patience in addition to ambition. How have you tried to achieve that inside of Red Cell and with DEFCON AI?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in balance. So one of the things I think that has helped me a lot in my career is I like carrying both sides of an idea in my head at one time, which is not something that Western society really encourages. So I see the value of a very methodical approach to funding complex weapon systems, et cetera, and also the value of moving very quick and breaking things when it comes to revolutionary technology. And there's a balance. I consistently have counseled the Department of Defense that they have to see that ability to balance as a lever at their disposal. So, for example, if you're buying a carrier, you want to be really thoughtful about it. You don't have very many of them, and it takes a really long time to build, and whatever you buy, you're stuck with for 50 years, and it costs you $1 billion a year to maintain it, and you want to be really, really thoughtful. If you're that thoughtful about what the next software build is going to be, you're always going to be behind. And it's classic, best being the enemy of the good enough. And when it comes to revolutionary innovation, the cycle of technology has gotten so fast that the very fact that DoD works in 2 to 7 year cycles in budgeting tells you right off the bat we're not going to be able to move fast enough to keep up on revolutionary innovation. That wasn't true 20 years ago. It wasn't true 30 years ago. So my counsel to the Department of Defense is urgency is appropriate for revolutionary innovation. It doesn't mean you have to blow the whole system up. It doesn't mean you have to, stop buying carriers the way you buy carriers. But it does mean you need to drastically change the way you think about, the way you contract, the way you move out on. And some of it is very simple. Like, for example, earlier I said the speed from decision to action. And I use that phrase a lot because it doesn't engender any risk to move faster from decision to action, right? If you want to say there's risk in moving faster to decision, that is true. I will still argue that the balance of risk is vastly greater in not having a higher sense of urgency, but I acknowledge that there is risk. But decision to action, you're not accepting any risk. You've already decided what to do, right? It is a free good to simply say, if we decide on Thursday that we're going to fund a startup, we ship the money on Friday, right? And the number of startups that will go out of business waiting for a defense contract will drop drastically. So to the Department of Defense, I counsel urgency. To the investors, there is an aspect of patience that's going to be required. The returns are real. The opportunity is real. I deeply believe that we are going to be looking at a set of primes that are going to be venture backed 5-10 years from now, but you're just not going to see, a company go from idea to $1 billion contract in 6 months, because that's just not how the Defense Department works. Now, you do get, DEFCON took off like a rocket, and it took off really fast, and that was because of confluence of urgency on the part of the Defense Department, where they pushed very hard to make sure that they stayed colored within the lines, did everything ethically, competed contracts appropriately, but moved as fast as the system would possibly let them. And urgency on our part. I mean, you would not believe the level of pain and sacrifice we endured to move as fast as we did. But there was a stars-aligned moment. The average defense startup is going to struggle to move that fast, and there is going to be patience required. But I believe the returns are real, and I do believe they're coming.
And when you think about revenue drivers in the public sector, how do you think they should be operating? Is it the same level of balance? Like if you have a chief revenue officer, head of public sector, since technically DEFCON AI is probably going to be dual use and this will be used commercially eventually, I would assume. How would you think about the right mentality in the revenue leader?
Yeah, so this is how I think about it. You know, Scott Stapp, who is both my chief technology officer, chief revenue officer, absolutely incredible leader, was the CTO of Northrop Grumman. Could not ask for a better person in that job. He thinks about it the same way. We act with maximum level of urgency. No grass grows under the feet of a DEFCON employee. If there's an opportunity to move something along, we move it incredibly fast. Creating a sense of urgency at the department is accomplished by demonstrating simultaneous excellence at execution and the ability to actually impact warfighting risk at a strategic level. Mm-hmm. And so what we try to do is two things. One is show people that we deliver on time, above spec, on budget, every time. If we say we can do something, we can do it. And by the way, if we don't know if we can do it, we don't tell you we can do it. We tell you we think we can do it, but we're not sure. We might crash and burn. Or we actually do this all the time, which is pretty unique for a defense contractor, is we'll often say, like, I don't know, it might be possible, but probably not, but we're game to try it if you're up for it, you know? So people know that when we say we can do something, we can do it, but also to be able to show people this moves the needle. The reaction to the DEFCON product demos have been unbelievable. Literally, 4-star generals, like, laughing and smiling and oh my God, and you know, I've never seen anything like this before, and it's about time, because they see it and you can just demonstrate how you can move the needle on a war-winning and losing risk, how you can save hundreds of millions of dollars, and not ethereal. You know, the joke when I was back in the Pentagon used to be that every proposal said I can save money 8 years from now. Because we budget out to, you know, it's 2 years until the budget starts, so we're thinking about 5 years of budget, and then in the 8th year, you're gonna save money, right? But we can actually show you can save real money, enormous amounts of money today, well more than it would cost you to get the technology. That's how we aim to create a sense of urgency. Beating on a defense official and telling them, you gotta move faster, be more urgent, that doesn't help. What helps is showing them something where they wake up the next morning and they can't stop thinking about how, if I don't deploy this technology immediately, I'm putting thousands of warfighters' lives at risk. Then they will go and act in the way that demonstrates that sense of urgency.
So it comes down to the technology, and then of course the whole team working in an urgent manner to make sure that you're delivering on what you promise.
Yep.
Tough job for a CEO.
It's not boring.
Let's talk more about the technology specifically, because AI has become the most overused, acronym I've ever heard. Let's break it down a little bit more for people who don't know DEFCON AI specifically. Like, tell me about the technology at DEFCON.
Yeah, so first, we are very much problem-driven more than we are technology-driven. So there are multiple technological problems that we've solved with AI, and there are multiple technical problems that we've solved without AI because AI wasn't the right solution. One of the things that drives our product philosophy is the idea that the user presents a problem and we solve it for you, and you don't need to know how we did it, right? So for example, some of the problems we solve, depending on the nature, the scale, the size, the scope, there are methods where pure combinatorial optimization, just math and physics, will solve it for you faster and better than AI will. And there are regimes where AI will do vastly better than pure combinatorial optimization. And from a product perspective, you don't have to care. You simply put in your problem and it gives you the solution. And the fact that in the background we're doing this or we're doing that, or they're competing with each other to see which gives a better answer, doesn't matter to you. I'm a big believer in that philosophy, and I think it's been very effective for us in that when we go to a warfighter, they see a tool we've built and they say, I need that. That solves my problem, and it does it in a way that is more effective, more cost effective, more resilient than I could have done it myself. And by the way, does it, it would have taken me 2 weeks to solve it and it did it in 20 seconds. But from the user's perspective is technology agnostic. Now, I will say artificial intelligence has been an incredible advancement and has blown the doors off what you can actually do. There is no way DEFCON could have done the technical achievements that it's made in the last couple of years without the massive leaps forward in AI or without AI itself. And that's why we are an AI company first and foremost. But from the user's perspective, it is the fact that it solves their problem that we believe is important.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit more about how this works even outside of national security, how this works commercially in addition, because contested logistics hasn't only existed inside of the Pentagon.
Yeah, so we're getting a very strong demand signal from commercial. We're only just starting to focus on that now. Company's only 2 years old and we have to focus on our primary customer first. The commercial industry in logistics, they do incredible work on squeezing efficiency out of their supply chain. I have no interest in competing with, Amazon on doing 2-day shipping better than they do it because I recognize a job well done. Mm-hmm. But there are a couple of characteristics of what we do that are very unique. The Department of Defense, the way I usually say it is like if Amazon does an incredible job of shipping what they do in 2 days. But if I said to you, hey, Amazon, I'm going to give you a country you've never been in before, and you're not going to know which country, and you're not going to know what you need to ship. Is it electronics? Is it books? And then I give you that problem and tell you, hey, you've got to go execute that mission next week. That's a really unique challenge that the military deals with all the time. And then they deal with a level of disruption that is very unique. In the private sector, the Baltimore Bridge collapses, and it's an enormous problem. But in the military, you have to presume that bridges are targets. And if you become reliant on something, you have to presume it will go away. Mm. And so our ability to create resiliency cost effectively and to focus on the ability to respond to disruption is very unique. And there are enormous commercial opportunities there. And that's something we're starting to explore now. And then as we expand, we're expanding across multiple different mission areas in the Department of Defense. Many of them have corollaries in the commercial world where there are military-specific problems that will create technology that is then applicable in the commercial world. So, I would never advise, Amazon to build in the level of resiliency that you would build into a military operation, but if you can add significant levels of resilience at extremely low cost, which is something we believe we can do, that's really desirable. And certainly the ability to pivot and respond. The Baltimore Bridge collapses, and 20 seconds later, we're revectoring aircraft in the air and ships and trucks and so on, so that the disruption, instead of this being a 70% degradation capability, it's a 3% degradation capability. That's something I think commercial sector is very excited about.
And then the money behind that 3% is huge.
Yeah, and it provides you an enormous competitive advantage if you can do it and your competitors cannot. So the easiest example in the military is the military is given a real-world operation. They have to move a variety of complex assets across the world in a contested environment, and they have to do it cost effectively, and resilient. That's something that right now it take the Air Force between about a week and 10 days to plan an operation like that, and we can do it in about 30 seconds. So think about that from a disruption perspective, right? If it takes your adversary 8 hours to plan and execute a cyber attack, and they go after a key node, and your plan takes another week to come back up, you're always behind the curve. If it takes you 30 seconds, you're always ahead of the curve, and you're going to execute. We also have the ability to balance imperatives, which is not just novel in logistics. I've never seen it anywhere in the Department of Defense. Commanders will, some days they have to be maximally effective, and you're getting out of Afghanistan. You've got to move a whole bunch of stuff really quickly. Other times it's day-to-day operations, and if you come in 3% late but you save 30% of your cost, that's a great deal. sometimes you're under fire and you need resiliency, sometimes you're not and you don't. We have the ability we actually have sliders where a user can say, give me a high resiliency, low cost effectiveness, medium effectiveness, and it'll give you the answer. That's really unique, and it gives you the ability to save hundreds of millions of dollars in your day-to-day operations, but then just blow the doors off when you actually have to execute a real-world military operation.
Right.
And the ability to respond when your adversary tries to get in your way, and in many cases not even have to respond because you just build things out in a resilient fashion. So they take an action, the AI's already foreseen they were going to do it, and you've already gotten around it. That's really game changing.
Huge.
Yeah, in the commercial sector, it would be more along the lines of significant supply chain disruptions, or the Baltimore Bridge collapses, or an era of COVID where there are significant disruptions. And so, what is a massive pro in the commercial world, which is efficiency of supply chain, the fact that you can squeeze every penny out and be maximally efficient, creates fragile, brittle networks purposefully. And the ability to either respond to disruption or build in that resiliency a priori at very low cost is an enormous benefit.
Yeah, I love that this not only is useful in times of crisis or urgent needs, but it allows you to think about what would happen if this happened. How do we build a plan for the future?
Yeah.
How can we get our operations in order to ensure that we're never in moment of crisis? I think that is the uniqueness about the platform, certainly.
Yeah, and one of the things that AI can do, because you asked about AI earlier, that really wasn't possible before the advent of AI, is to play that bad guy, right? And to think through, hey, what's an adversary going to do in response to what I've done? And then how do I get 6 steps ahead so that when you actually get into the real world, you're 6 steps ahead, right? That's really unique and exciting.
The challenge is mapping out the future for other companies in the DoD, mapping out the future for your team. How do you think about the challenges that DEFCON AI is going to see in the future? Is it production? Is it talent? What is it for DEFCON?
The number one challenge for DEFCON is the speed mismatch that we talked about earlier. There's no question about that. The team is incredible. They have produced incredible technology at incredible speed. They have overcome challenge after challenge after challenge. And the Department of Defense has responded. I mean, we've seen incredible movement on their part to move at a speed and pace that is very unusual in DoD. But there is a constant looming risk of, yes, we want to do this, and we will get to it promptly when they get to it. That requires constant vigilance on our part and on the Department of Defense's part. And that is, in my opinion, the most significant risk. The number 2 risk for DEFCON is a classic startup risk, where we are scaling very, very fast, and the opportunity is vast, and the demand signal is enormous. And that balance of scaling as fast as you can, but no faster, is real. Making sure that we maintain our reputation for delivering on time, on schedule, on spec, above spec. We didn't try to eat more of the elephant than we could swallow, but also recognizing that there are global urgent imperatives that require us to move extremely fast, keeping both sides of those equations kind of in our minds at all time, and hitting that maximum point. If we push any faster, we will fail, but we can push this fast and get there. And staying right there, that requires vigilance and care, and that is, I would say, the number 2 risk for us.
Okay. And when you think about hiring new people to the DEFCON team, obviously your company needs to scale and grow. As the problem becomes bigger and the opportunity becomes bigger, you have to scale people at the same time, even though AI can do a lot. But tell me a little bit about how you think about hiring. Do you look for mission orientation? Do you look for skill and specialty? How do you think about?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's funny you should ask me that question, because as you know, when I encounter complex hiring problems, I call you to think it through. But I will tell you that, I can talk a lot about the standard things that people talk about. We do maintain kind of an A+ hiring bar. We really try to hire the best of the best. A couple of things that make us unique is I am a big believer in melding different levels of expertise together. I'm a big believer that when you take a truly incredible operator and a truly incredible software engineer and you create a culture where they can talk to each other, you get a vastly better outcome than when either of them alone executes. And finding the type of person who is capable of those interactions is a challenge, and it's one we take very seriously. The other thing I think is interesting that I focus on is I look very hard at people's balance of optimism and realism. I love people who look at impossible problems and say, well, that looks really interesting. You know, I mean, one of my strategy senior vice presidents who used to work for me in the government, he used to tell people, he used to say, if you want Brumer to get excited about something, don't tell him it's easy. If you tell him it's easy and we got this, he'll say, well, why are we working on it? Right? You tell him it's really hard. I love people who get after really hard problems and who see really hard problems get excited by them. But that can be taken too far. There are folks who will never stop, banging away at an impossible problem, or will drink their own Kool-Aid and convince themselves that they can do something that they can't. And periodically you'll find somebody who's got that perfect balance of give me impossible problems, I want to get after them. Also, I've been banging my head against this one, and this one is really impossible. It is literally not metaphorically impossible, and I'm going to go work on something else. I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's good perspective. And I think it's, again, the balance. It's really, really hard to find folks that have both sides of that experience. I will say talent and hiring right now is more fun than it's ever been before, because 5 years ago in this space, it was trying to cross-pollinate talent from the commercial landscape into this landscape to bring a certain level of ambition to the national security sector that really did not exist before.
I agree.
And after folks like yourself made the merge, and after others jumped into transition to, I want to go build startups, I think we're finally starting to see this level of wisdom and balance between ambition and patience that is so required, and maybe impossible problems and the possible ones that just look impossible. So I think it'll be a really fun 4 years moving forward.
Yeah, it's also one of the things that I really like about working with Grant, I will say. He and I have had innumerable conversations where we both have this kind of infinite ambition for solving hard problems and willingness to just walk away when something that is just not going to work. And I can name multiple conversations where we cycled through this great idea, that great idea, this one can't work, that one's impossible, and then at the end we come up with something that is both incredibly exciting and feasible. After which the pain starts, but it's a good partnership, and I think that's indicative of the entire Red Cell universe, DEFCON and Zephyr, and really the array of other companies. And for me also, it's interesting to watch because, early on I was very involved in every Red Cell company, and cultures, scaling a culture can be a real challenge. But one of the things Red Cell has done really well is scale a culture. So now I see multiple companies, Hunted Labs, which is an incredible success, and Claros, which is unbelievable technology that, I get involved, I advise, but I'm not really the engine driving anything. But to watch them replicate the successes of other companies that I've been more involved in, because it's these incredible people with the same mission drive, with the same impossible problem focus, with the resources that Red Cell brings. That's been really rewarding.
That's awesome. I think if there's anything that people can take away from the conversation is one, DEFCON saw an impossible problem and said, oh wait, I think that's actually possible to solve. There was this level of optimism. And then across the 11 other companies that exist inside of Red Cell now, it was probably the same case with all of them. There's a really unique challenge there, and people have deemed it an impossible problem, but we're gonna go see if we can prove that it is not quite impossible.
Yeah, and there's a there's a patience also, and I know we've only been around for, Red Cell's only been around for 4.5 years. So it doesn't sound like patience is one of our virtues, but there's an innumerable backlog of problems that we kick around constantly. And, the way I usually describe it is it's like looking at a perfect metal sphere. And you could just turn this thing around in your hand all day long, and there's just no cracks, no way in. And we'll just sit there. Every once in a while, come back to it, look around, and there's nothing. You do that enough and you start to see cracks, and those cracks become companies. And DEFCON's a great example of deploying artificial intelligence at scale. Was a problem I've been thinking about for a very long time. And that contested logistics, coupled with a bunch of other stuff we've been thinking about, just creates that crack. And now there's a way in, and then you start whittling away at it, and then you start pulling it apart, and then all of a sudden the whole sphere breaks open, and it's the most rewarding feeling, you can imagine. That's the thing that, if you ask me what excites me about the Red Cell universe, it is that we have this backlog of 100 incredibly important problems, and we are kind of, and every once in a while somebody will come back and say, hey, that sphere that was perfect, that's the crack. And then you go.
I love that you use the term Red Cell universe, a term that I would have never conceived of it 4 years ago.
It's been incredible. And there's a feedback loop. And the feedback loop is true at the big picture Red Cell level, and it's true at like the DEFCON microcosm level, where when you have this mission drive and the opportunity to really have an impact, it attracts incredible people, which creates those opportunities, which attract those incredible people, and then it cycles forward. And and so at the Red Cell level, it's this proliferation of companies that are changing the world across cyber defense and healthcare. At the DEFCON level, it's this proliferation of technology advancements that are revolutionizing the applications of software engineering, AI at scale operationally in the Department of Defense. Yeah, it's really satisfying. It's really satisfying. And it's self-propelling, which is really nice.
Yes, I think it is self-propelling. I mean, a good recruiter will help, but
Yes.
self-propelling
We have a good recruiter.
to some extent. Let's talk about what's next for DEFCON. Like, what does the future look like?
Yeah, so there is an opportunity in the demand signal of almost unimaginable scope. I said earlier, I'm a big believer that we are at a moment of enormous risk for global military advantage, and the core technologies that DEFCON built are applicable not just in contested logistics and commercial applications, but across an array of mission areas. And the ability to do mission planning and operational decision making faster, more effectively, cost effectively, to build resilience a priori into operations. Those technologies are extensible across the array of mission areas. And so I see it very much as this sort of horizontal expansion across mission areas. And then in each case, there's this vertical expansion into the commercial world. And we are aggressively pursuing that. And there's no shortage of challenge. There's no shortage of opportunity.
Awesome. Cool. Is there anything else you want to leave us with?
No, look, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I am enormously grateful to you personally and to Daversa for introducing me to Grant and for your contribution to making all of this real. So thank you. It's great to see you.
Awesome. Great to see you too.